Today is our December 16th meeting, and our weekly meetings will continue every Wednesday until June 30th of 2021, and you have to be a member of NMUG to attend our Zoom meetings. We have begun the registration process for our class program for the spring of 2021. So far, we have had great interest shown by our membership, and we are looking forward to 10 outstanding classes. The first one will be in less than 4 weeks, and we are looking forward to a wonderful season. The question is asked by many of our members, should they update to Big Sur? And I think our technical experts feel, be careful, be cautious, you may run into problems. And I just wanted to issue a warning. Go ahead if you feel that you can handle problems. And I think it's in fact very interesting to work with a new operating system. But if you are concerned that you may lose some apps, some control of your computer, I would suggest you wait a few more weeks until Dennis and Jeff will give their okay. I am the contact for Zoom problems, but so far I think our membership has really vastly improved. We've almost run into no problems at all in signing up for our Zoom meetings. Our forthcoming program until the end of this year and until this month, on December 30th, we have a very interesting program on VPN. And the week before, we have another outstanding program. The subject is street photography tips and techniques. And today we have one of our longest members, one of our oldest members, one of our most active members, Bob Kenedi, to give us a presentation. So
I hope you see the title slide.
Yes, we do.
Yes?
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. George asked me some time ago to talk about holiday picture taking. And then iPhone 12 came along, and talking with Mitch, we agreed that I will supplement his presentation on the phone last week with the camera aspects of it this time. So what I decided, actually the two come together very, very well, because iPhone is very much about night pictures, which is mostly what happens when holidays come along. Most of the picture taking is at night. So what I'm going to do is a discussion, and my slides will have also reference information. So some of the slides might look scary to you. The purpose of those is not to go through them during the presentation, rather to have it as reference. So we'll talk about a little bit about photography that needs to be understood in order to appreciate the really not revolutionary, but revolution signaling features in iPhone 12, particularly in the Pro Max version of it, and then also talk about holiday picture taking. So with that, I faced the question with all the automation, what is there to talk about when we talk about photography? Those who heard me talk before know that I very often go to the great photographer and great teacher, Ansel Adams, and his teachings. I will quote five of his statements and show you how I shaped the presentation along those statements. I interpret that message that there is nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept, a clear message that our photos should convey a message which is just as important as the technical quality of our images. The camera cannot capture the mood, but the photographer can. What he means by that is that we need to know our camera, what it can do, what it cannot do, and complement what it cannot do. That, as you will see in the presentation, becomes a very key element. Not only my presentation, but iPhone 12 itself. The single most important component of a camera is the 12 inches behind it, which is his estimated width of our head. In other words, it's the photographer who should make the decisions, not the camera. And a great photo, and I really, really think about that all the time, is one that fully expresses what one feels about what is being photographed. In other words, I like the photographs to make a statement about the subject, not just an image of it. And photography is, in fact, some means of communications, and think of your photos as recorded speech and compose it to express your intended message. The long one I will not read, spend the time to read, but it says it is our personality that makes our photos unique. And it's really in the processing of our pictures where that personality comes in. So looking at my interpretations, and I can turn that into the subject of this meeting. Be conscious of what you want to say about your subject, not just what you want to say, but what you want to say about the subject. I will briefly review relevant photo terms, and I will show you why. Then discuss the new iPhone 12 features, their value and their use. Show some examples of holiday photography, and hope I will have time to demo a couple of processing of pictures. I will first give you a kind of rundown of all of these, starting with the first one. This is an example. I was in a workshop, and the workshop was about fall colors, and this is what we saw from a bridge, and that's a kind of dried out, almost dried out riverbed. You can see the picture of the photographers on the bridge, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to be, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Down here, somewhere down here in this area. So I saw something else there. This is what I saw. That gorge normally underwater, this time luckily just a waterfall. And what I saw was an abundance of brilliant white water, a beautiful display of the dynamic energy of nature. So what did that mean to me is to express that, I have to express the motion. It cannot be a frozen water image. I have to give detail in the water and brilliance. And for the brilliance of the water come out, I must not overexpose the picture. You have to be aware that with digital photography, once you overexpose a picture, there are no details in the overexposed area. Underexposure can be saved a little bit. Those of you who did photography, film photography before, will know that it's the exact opposite of film photography, where overexposed could be dealt with a little bit, but underexposure could not. Now, the second subject, as I go through those subjects before I get into the details, uh, here is Apple's, this is straight from Apple website, the features of iPhone 12 Pro Max. Not something that I would want to talk about. So before doing this, I thought I would talk about photography principles. That's in the yellow area. A little bit about the new technologies brought in by Apple and their significance. And a few words about the format of the picture that we get out of our camera, because as you will see, it has some real importance, even if you are not going to use it. So with that, I could group all those items that I don't even want you to read here uh, as new features from a photographer's point of view. First thing we do, we frame our picture. We decide what's going to be in. We decide what to zoom in on, to bring in close. And there are some nice improvements there. The second step then is to focus and be able to maintain that sharpness without blurring it by camera motion or generally motion blur. Uh, there is, of course, a color quality as well that is going to be improved. But very importantly, there are things, remember the statement, uh, camera cannot capture mood, but the photographer can. Well, that's just one example. There's a whole lot that the camera can do and the camera cannot do. And Apple is going to dig in to those that the camera up to now could not do. The photographers had to do it in processing afterwards. But now iPhone is just spitting out the picture with some of that work done for us. So that's probably where I gave away the big news. So the item after that will be showing and looking at some holiday pictures and some processing. Now this, what you see here, is what came out of the camera for this picture. This is how it looks after processing. Just one more general point. As I mentioned before, some of the charts will be complex, primarily because I assume there are two kinds of interest among those who are tuned in and listening and hope to stay throughout. One is those who are using iPhone as their primary camera, and those who are using a traditional camera as their primary camera and have some other use for iPhone. My previous presentation to the club, I emphasized that really iPhone is a great camera, a very capable camera, and it's your attitude to the camera that makes the difference between some really high quality pictures that could go into exhibits versus pictures that are just showing where you were on Facebook. The real point I want to make on this, though, is my comment: automation, including the use of artificial intelligence in our recent automation capabilities included in cameras, has a great value, but that value is even greater if we know how best to use it, what is it capable of, and when I say capable of, allowing us to put our priorities into the picture. That was my first point, that you need to know what you want to say, and will the camera allow you to do that? Or do you have to do a lot of post-processing after to make the picture really good? So if we start with a little more, getting into the little more detail, the first thing would be understanding our camera. With that, I will then able to show you that last list of features that I showed before, that really messy slide, which can be turned into something much more useful. So the first one is a group of features or photography principles about the camera that I want to make sure we have a common understanding. First one is what we expect from our camera. We expect sharpness. Sharpness as good as we focused it and not affected by any unintended motion blur. And motion blur could occur to the subjects or objects that we want to take picture of, or even more so, very much more so, by the camera that we are holding. And of course, we can put our iPhone on tripod, but that's really not a good real practice for iPhones. I mean, I shouldn't say that. That's a good practice for iPhone, but not really a practical one. So the purpose of iPhone is it's always with us. So let's pull it out of our pocket and use it. The other part of what we expect from our camera is brightness, the right brightness, not too dark, not underexposed, not overexposed, and have, at least to start with, true colors coming through. The problem with that is that less light is available. When there is not enough light available, it is harder and harder to achieve that. So there we go into two areas where we need to supplement the camera. But, sorry, I think I did not bring that slide up, the brightness. So going to the next slide, here is a more detailed list of items that the camera can not do. The camera by itself cannot give you depth. The camera comes out with a flat picture. It's perception, our perception, that makes it dimensional. And that perception to be dimensional has to be put in by the photographer, at least in conventional cameras. Uh, when we look at a picture, we recognize people, we recognize a flag, we recognize a cat, we recognize a mountain. The camera, I'm sorry, uh, the camera only sees shapes, lines, textures, and colors. We see the scene continuously. We just really catch a moment out of life. But in our mind, we have seen what happened before and what happened after. That sometimes makes the viewer of our picture hard to understand what's going on. And that has to be supplemented by the photographer. Low light, yeah, the camera can handle low light, but it needs support. And here the point is, let's have, particular for iPhone, uh, more capability so that we do not have to put our iPhone on a solid surface or carry along a little tripod with it for the picture. Another, again, I made that mistake, sorry. Let me just back up. As I'm pointing at the picture, I click and that causes the problem. So the next one is senses. When we are at the scene, we hear the action. We hear the waterfall. We hear the sound in the arena if we watch hockey. We connect in our mind what we snapped for the picture with what happened before and after. For example, as we step left or right, the depth of the field that we see is uh, is different. So we know, we all of a sudden find out that the tiger is before the tree and not behind. Uh, that comes with uh, some motion. But our senses are also involved. Hearing, particularly, perceptions. We perceive the objects, as I mentioned before, the camera does not, and emotions. So here's an example. In this hockey event, particularly if you have ever been at a hockey match, there's noise. The noise comes from the skates. Here you can see the motion. It's a still picture, but you perceive the motion partly because of the gesture of this, particularly this player. And even though you don't hear the voice, if you've been in an arena, it gives you back to you a little bit of the excitement that happens there in a scene like this. This also captures the motion in a different way. Uh, Here, there is a motion blur. I had to be very careful taking this picture because if I took it with a very fast shutter speed, the water would look frozen. If I took it with a too slow shutter speed, the water would not have any energy in it. The water, either way, the water would not have had any energy in it. I hope that the way it is captured uh, does reflect the abundance, does reflect the brilliance of the water, and above all, does reflect the nature's energy the dynamic energy of the movement of this amount of water. So let's look at the camera, and the key features that I think you will find very important to understand in order to use the camera pretty much the right way. The first one is focus. Focal focus is a much, generally in photography, I'm very unhappy with the large amount of poor definitions and confusing uh, uh, use of words. Focus itself doesn't mean anything. Almost always has to be a little bit more than just focus. The focal length is a property of the lens itself. Uh, if it's a zoom lens, it's variable, but it is the character of the lens as far as what is its focal length, or between what limits can its focal length be varied. And you set that focal length on the primary subject of normally of your image. Oh, that's what is called focusing. Focusing sets a distance, and only at that one distance are theoretically things in focus. Everything be shorter or longer. The sharpness varies with the distance from the camera. It's the sharpest where you focused, and that sharpness decreases for picture elements. It won't increase, but it decreases for picture elements that are closer and those that are further than the set focusing distance. That does not mean that they are out of focus, because there's this term depth of field. The sharpness decreased, but it is still perceived as sharp psychologically. It's still science. Uh, it's not really visible, so the picture could look sharp from the nearest to the furthest because of our control of the depth of field. The depth of field is the length or depth uh, of that perceived sharpness, where that perceived sharpness prevails. That's the depth of field. The autofocus may or may not set the focus to what you desire, and may not set the depth of field to what you desire. But, and this is important, the realistic perception of depth, and to highlight the importance of the main subject of the picture, it helps to contrast the maximum sharpness of the main subject with intentionally decreased sharpness of background objects. And I will illustrate that, not here, but a little bit later. So the point here is we set a sharpness, but it's sharp to a controlled amount, both before and after. And for most pictures, for many pictures, not most, for many pictures, it's very important, particularly portraits. It's very important to control that depth of field. Now, when we choose not to have sharpness in the picture, the term bokeh, as it appears in Apple's list, and it's a generally known term in photography, it's referring to the visual quality of the decreased sharpness. In other words, the decreased sharpness should not look fuzzy. It should look soft. And that's the perceived visual quality of the unsharp areas is called the bokeh. Now, once we set the camera for focus, the next thing is to set the camera for exposure. Apple hides this from us for most of the time, but it's good to understand what's behind all that. Aperture and exposure time are the factors here. Aperture is the size of the lens opening relative to the focal length. This is analogous to a room with a window. The further you are from the window, the less light there is. The smaller the window, the less light there is. So the amount of light depends both on what lets in the light, which is the lens, and how far behind that point we are, which is the sensor or the film. So aperture setting for exposure, the larger the aperture, the more brightness. That's the larger the window, the more light. However, the smaller the aperture, the more depth of field that we just discussed before. So the sharpness of depth in our picture, to get sharpness from the beginning, from the closest to the furthest in our picture, will require some sacrifice of the brightness. Not always, not when there's a lot of light, but when there is low light situation. So what then reaches the sensor for capturing the picture will be less light. But if we make the exposure longer, then we can make up for it. So here we have a chain. The sharpness of depth of field needs smaller aperture. To keep the brightness needs longer exposure. And to avoid motion blur or avoid the need for tripod or other kind of support, needs better sensors. So that's why improving the sensors is a very key competitive element of photography these days, and will remain for a while. In other words, the required exposure times can be reduced by sensor improvements. Now, there is another lighting situation where we have both very harsh lights and very dark areas. That is called HDR, high dynamic range situation. In a high dynamic range situation, today we have to take more than one exposure because the range of light to dark to which our eye adjusts very quickly has to be done in the camera in steps. In other words, we would take 2, 3, or even up to 9, in some cases even more. Those would be very, very rare, but up to sometimes 7 or 9 different exposures, uh, and then do the processing of those into what's called an HDR picture. All these terms appear in iPhone 12. So if you will need to make a decision whether you want that camera or not, you need to understand these. So I filled that in with some explanations in areas where there's some confusion. I won't spend time on that part, but it's there for reference. So we have gone through what cameras can do, cannot do, the focusing, the brightness, and the HDR. So next, in this color, we will discuss uh, features that will show up in our iPhone 12 specifications. And we need to understand not necessarily what they are, but what they can do. So image stabilization, I think that's a relatively simple point. We move the camera. If we handhold the camera, it moves to some extent. That can be compensated in the camera. This is a current camera features everywhere, but Apple's capability in the iPhone is exceptional, has been exceptional, and that and only that is the reason why Apple iPhone is even currently being used by professionals. Not widely, but it can produce good quality images, and it's the main reason is the excellent stabilization, but still not enough. Nothing is enough there. It's up to infinite improvement. Now, when I saw LiDAR, I got a little excited. Uh, Radar, you know what radar does? It finds objects in the air and measures their distance. LiDAR does that with laser on a small scale. So LiDAR scanning is a laser assisted distance measurement that requires no light. It's electronically performed, and therefore the result of it is readily available in digital language, which means that today's camera, when you snap it, it tells you pixel by pixel every brightness, every color in your image. LiDAR scanning could add to this. How far is that pixel from the camera? In other words, that distance measurement that could bring back the third dimension and other things. So once I saw LiDAR scanning, I got very excited because that is a huge new technology for open-ended opportunities. Deep fusion is also deep confusion, not for Apple, for us. Every time when you press your shutter on the iPhone, a huge amount of things happen before you see that picture. You see that picture within a fraction of a second, but in that fraction of a second, huge things happen, including deep, deep confusion, deep fusion. It's confusing because we don't know what Apple does there. But what the purpose of Apple is in there is clear. Apple takes multiple pictures and processes those multiple pictures into a single photo. In other words, what camera cannot uh, find, normal cameras, conventional cameras cannot find, they find by taking multiple pictures and taking the best out of each of them. Now, as far as my guess goes, that includes the multiple lenses. So you take a picture at a certain lens, it has three, the new camera has three lenses. You take a picture with the middle lens, the normal uh, width of your picture, and you think that's the picture taken. But I think Apple takes a picture with all three lenses at the same time and computes different things from the different pictures and puts them together into defining a single picture. Biochip neuroprocessor is another term you see in there, and that's Apple's uh, processor for primarily artificial intelligence type functions. It's deeply involved in the deep fusion, helping that thing to happen and helping the thing to give us good quality. Apple also increased the sensor size, which, as I explained before, will improve image quality in low light. The other term, optical zoom, you know what zoom is. Zoom can be performed to some extent by the lenses and to a much larger extent later on digitally. What is done digitally is decreasing image quality. Once you go beyond the optical achievable zooming, you start decreasing image quality. So depending on how fussy you are, depending on how uh, large you want to enlarge your picture or print your picture, that distinction of optical zoom becomes important. So I stop here for a couple of questions. I would like to reserve most time for pictures at the for questions at the end. Uh, do we have any at this point, or should I proceed?
If you have any questions, could you please raise your hand in the chat? Right now, I don't see any
Good.
hands. So why don't you continue on, Bob? If I see a hand, I will let you know.
Because we have done that step at brief review of terms and camera settings, now you could appreciate the new features grouped by function. There are features for framing the image. There are features for setting focus and maintaining sharpness. There are features for image quality. And most importantly, that group of increasing the capability of photography as an art, as a technique, as a function, by putting into the camera what the photographer had to do before, not before picture taking, but had to do before, after taking the picture in processing. So that gives a little hint what will follow down here. But right now we are in this area discussing the features which I grouped. And that grouping is like here. I don't really have too much to say about the first group. It's mostly about the zooming, the width of it, and the lenses involved. As I said, these lenses, the ultra wide, have a aperture. This is the way the aperture size is indicated. The smaller the number, the larger, more light comes in. To get a professional, to get 2.4, 2.2 for a regular camera, we have to go to the professional lens category, and it would cost generally in the upper $1,000, close to 2,000 up range for a good lens in with that kind of aperture. Ultra wide means wide field. Telephoto should mean a narrow field, but this telephoto is a weakness. I think a weakness of all iPhones. And the reason is that you get the telephoto effect, in other words, bringing the subject closer in, the longer the lens. Now, the long lens in iPhone, what they call telephoto, is 63 millimeters. Now, 63 millimeters would stick out of the camera about 3 inches. There is no lens on iPhone that sticks out 3 inches. Or longer or at all. They are all due to the optical systems that are designed in there. But to make those optical systems longer is really hard. And that's why an increase that they gave in the optical zooming zone is up to 5 for Pro Max, up to 4, I think, for the non-Pro Max versions of 12. And the digital zoom goes up to 12x. Now, this is interesting. Panorama, I didn't realize that before, but it's up to 63 megapixels. The camera gives us 12 megapixels for each picture. But in the panorama mode, we can get up to 63. So here are some examples. I took that picture sitting in an armchair here. You can see the arm. This would be the widest. This would be the telephoto, not that much of a telephoto. A good telephoto could really zero down to a much smaller area. But that's what we have to live with for a while with iPhone. You can buy extra lenses for telephoto that you can stick in front of it. So that's nevertheless a very impressive range. Here are some examples outdoors. That would be a wide view. That would be a close-up view. And here is a panorama I took which is a 50 megapixels, almost 50, 49 some pixels uh, image. So there's a lot of detail in that, and a lot of pixels to make this a fairly large uh, print. For a 5 print quality, this could be 12 inches, and this could be 45 inches. And in these cases, they will print to about 10 to 14 without extra processing. And these days, there are uh, very good, there's very good software available for doubling, tripling the size of a file, printable size of a file at very good quality. So if you are careful, and these are handheld pictures, but if you are holding the camera steady or put it on a tripod or hold it against a solid object, or at least lean yourself against a solid object, which I didn't do with these. Uh, you can get even crisper, better sharpness. This I just took afterwards as an extra because I did not go full width. I only took 49 megapixels of the 63 available. I took this one, but I ran out of time and I did not have the time to check out the megapixels on this. I suspect it's more. Now, uh, I didn't want to get bogged down in the presentation going back and forth from iPhone. So I took a few screenshots. This is the screenshot. I assume most of you know, but maybe some of you have not used the panel. I myself knew about it, but I never really made it conscious in my mind the extra megapixels I can get if instead of taking a regular picture, I use the panel capability to take the picture. It will give me more pixels, a better quality image. Now, the thing I want to point out is that yes, you can choose the uh, lens, the prime lens that you're taking it with, very wide or very narrow. I took the narrow ones for the maximum zoom, and I took the wide one for the maximum width. The arrow is very important. When you hold the camera, and I hope you see this, uh, the air, the you go around like this, and you have to keep the arrow on the line. Now, it's not this motion of the camera sideways that takes it off the line. It's the motion up and down. So when you take the panel, be very careful to keep the camera exactly vertical, which means exactly the arrow exactly on the line. And the arrow moves as you take the picture. And when you're at the end, it ends the picture, or whenever you take the camera away, will complete the picture. No problem there. But while you're doing it, keep the arrow on the line. The second one up, again, I clicked, sorry. Um, in this situation, I just took it going a little bit forward in what I will be presenting. Uh, you see that this is yellow and it shows a 1 second time. And you see that square and you see that light here. In case you are not familiar with it, this is focus. If I click, if I touch it, I'm sorry, not click. If on the phone I touch it, as I do when taking the picture, it will focus on, it will set the focal distance to that subject. So if I wanted to put the focal distance, in other words, this focus on this item, I would drag the square over this item and tap it. That will focus on that item. This one I can move up and down and will make the picture brighter or darker than the auto setting of the exposure would do for you. Be aware that as you move it up, the aperture opens and the time taking the picture gets longer. Now here you can see that this was in a dark room and night mode and 1 second exposure. We'll get a little closer to that shortly, what this means. This means portrait mode, and this shows the different modes that we can get with it. Next comes the features for focus setting. Apple increased the capability by making all the pixels, the pixels are capable of measuring the distance. They made all the pixels focus pixels, so they're speeding up and can do more. Sensor shift optical image stabilization means that they stabilize optically, but not by changing the lens system, but by moving the sensor along where our movement, as our movement shifts the reflection of the image. The key point here is portrait mode in with advanced bokeh and depth control. Here's an illustration. I took a picture. Current situations, I have no models to do it, so my model for the portrait is the flower. And by the way, because it's portrait mode, don't think in terms of people portraits. You can consider anything where you want to control the depth of field. That's portrait mode, control of depth of field, as we discussed it. In here, I took the picture without going into in photo mode. That is not controlling the depth of field. Here, I took the picture controlling the depth of field. So the depth of field is narrowed and the background is blurred. I'll have another example later. For image quality, very quickly, the lens elements give more flexibility to deal with situations. The quality is improving with that. The sensor was increased 47% in iPhone 12. I'm not sure if all models or not, but certainly in the Pro model. The sapphire crystal lens cover just relates to the cover of the lenses, which are exposed to our fingertips and general abuse. Keep them clean, but this protects them to a large extent. Now the features, the real thing, the features that the camera cannot do. It appears that Apple's strategy is very much leveraging the superb computer powers in the iPhone to do what traditional cameras cannot do or could not do up until now, and had to do but done in post-processing. That's why most uh, professional users didn't use more widely the iPhone up until now, but they will. Uh, just coincidentally, this weekend, this Sunday, I had was in a discussion group with a photographer called John Paul Caponegro, great photographer, very deeply involved with Adobe in features. And it turned out that he's using iPhone already to a very, very large extent for his photography. But the thing to do is to handle the phone as a camera and not as a toy or not as a phone, at least at the time when you're taking the pictures. And LiDAR is very exciting because it is going to expand the capabilities of both phones, smartphones, and also cameras uh, into this area of being able to complement the photographer and help filling in all these functions that are in this list. We went through it before depth, these functions. So I also put here each one of these, what is the help that function in the specification gives you. So there's a lot being done by Apple, and both on the surface and under the hood, to make the sharpness and holding on to the sharpness to which we focused, the ability of focusing, and the low light situation where iPhone gives high quality pictures. Now, here I added a couple of pictures. I took these pictures in complete darkness after sunset. I waited until it was complete darkness, except of course for these lights. This image handheld, this on tripod. Now you can see clearly the difference in sharpness. But if I did not have this picture here, I think you would consider this one. I've straightened, I didn't have the time to straighten it. But if straightened, this picture to be quite good, given that it was taken in absolute total darkness. Another look at the portrait mode. This I took, oops, sorry, let's back up from this. This I took in photo mode. You can see the sharpness. This I took in portrait mode. You can see the bokeh. And I don't like either. This is too much fuzziness for me. I would personally, I would like, my liking is somewhere in between. This, the background softened down enough that it does not look fuzzy, nor does it take too much attention away with details from the subject. The subject emerges from it, and but that's really the purpose, to be able to do what you want to do and able to get out of it and do it your way when that's what you want to do. They give you 6 different shooting modes light modes, emulating light situations. These three, natural light, studio light. I was standing the same position, taking almost exact same picture, the same light within a minute or so for the six. So no difference in the way the picture was taken, except choosing the light that I showed you on the screenshot for the portraits, natural light, studio light, contoured light, and stage light. You can see the focusing of the light on this, going a little too much in with the darkness here, and creating at the same time black and white versions of it. HDR, they claim smart HDR. HDR explained that it's dark here, it's very bright there, too much for the camera to have this much detail in both areas at the same time. I'm sorry, I left that that's a fault of mine. It's processing problem. That black does not exist. Uh, it's when I put it in keynotes. That's when it happened. So that's here smart because they do all the processing that goes with it. Now, it also says Apple Pro RAW, which is a mode of the file that you get out. And what it means is really RAW is lots of data. JPEG is a standardized interpretation. We photographers like to use RAW. A JPEG is great for most of photography, but it's critical for Apple for its strategy. And I think it's a warning shot to the camera market that Apple is on its way to enter it by expanding photography to record much more than light and color, as we discussed it earlier. I'd rather not go to questions here because we are going to have to be very quick now with the rest. So a few examples. The key, the key here is that as we go through these pictures, let's look at this one in a little more time. When you take pictures, the light source is either the sun or some reflector light or the lights inside the building or the home, and they are not in the picture. When it's holiday, it's the exact opposite. It's not just a HDR situation, but the subject is the light. It's the subject that you're looking for. So when the light is overexposed in a normal picture, you don't worry about it because you look at the picture. There's no detail here. That's the light source. But when you are taking holiday pictures, the light source is the subject, or at least part of this, a key element of the subject. And that's why all these pictures need processing. These previous pictures, let me go back, we're taking a Victoria Park. They have Christmas lights as a contract, I think, in their home for living there. They decorate the streets with each street with a theme. And there are loads and loads of cars going through there Christmas Day to take pictures of it. I recommend going a few days before Christmas if your objective is picture taking. and not waiting in the car as they slowly move around. Naples Botanical Garden has night lights. You can go there for nightlight, holiday light pictures. And then Halloween is a good opportunity for picture taking, not just Christmas time. Candles are always interesting. And again, the light source is part of the picture. So you have to be very careful not to expose the way you would. And the same thing for these. Now, an interesting subject is the moon, which I love to get something better pictures than that. Processing. Here is a picture that looks something like this when it comes out of my camera. So I take it to processed. And after I processed it, it would look something like this. So how do I get from here to there? Here are controls. These controls are in Lightroom or in Photoshop, but they also typical for practically every one of the different processing software. They adjust exposure, highlights, contrast, texture, and so on. Usually the secret is in the shadows, but in this case, it's not quite enough. I need to go to the exposure and out comes the image. And then you can refine it in software, in texture, in clarity. If you don't like what's in the background, you can probably bring the darkness down. In this picture, you can see that all the detail in the snowman, you can see the lights. It reflects the light, but not the mood of Christmas picture taking. This is much more the mood, what you see. When you see those lights, you see everything lit up. When it comes out of the camera, it's just the lights.
Bob, you have 1 minute.
Like the difference here. So that's basically what I wanted to say about processing. So that's it. I can stop the sharing, give back the controls, and that was it.
Michael or Eckhart?
Well, I want to thank Bob for an outstanding and very, very interesting presentation. Great, as you always are, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think with that, unless there are any additional comments, we could probably unmute ourselves and give a good hand to Bob for his presentation.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Great. Thank you.
Good job, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you.